morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Arvetta Jideonwo. I'm Executive Director of Bosma Visionary Opportunities Foundation. I'd like to introduce my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Bernard Turner, faculty member at Belmont University, and Cynthia Renea, President and CEO of Oda Enterprises. Thank you so much for coming to our session today. We're going to talk to you about reaching and engaging diverse communities in seeking philanthropic funds. Go ahead. Workshop objectives today. We're going to provide you with a comprehensive plan to seek funding support to engage diverse communities. As we know, funding is getting tighter and tighter, so we're going to talk to you about how you might engage with diverse communities in order to grow and increase your grant-seeking efforts. We're also going to provide you with tools to promote equity and inclusion by reducing barriers to participation and increasing relationship with diverse communities in seeking funding. We're also going to talk to you about common language that you may use in your efforts, as well as tracking progress, and of course, lastly, evaluating progress as well. We're not just going to talk to you just about how you might do this from a philanthropic perspective, but also how you might engage throughout your entire organization to really create a sound, diverse organization that is inclusive of all. Next slide. So our presentation today is based upon 6 building blocks for engaging diverse audiences. We took this from the Regional Arts and Culture Council, which really looked at how do you build a diverse audience? How do you engage with a diverse audience? So the building blocks are, first of all, it's establishing a foundation. Secondly, assessing your current audience. So looking at who are you currently serving, and of those individuals who you serve, how might you segment that population in order to serve more to increase your grant-seeking efforts? Thirdly, we're going to look at defining audience segments. Next, determining programming and events. Next, it will be developing a marketing and communication plan. And of course, lastly, evaluating your progress. Next slide. So let's look at the current state. As I alluded to earlier, as we know, funding is getting tighter and tighter. The competition for funds is fierce. So let's look at, research shows that people from diverse backgrounds really create solutions that introduce different thinking patterns and increase performance, creativity, and innovation within an organization. So how you involve those individuals is also really key to growing your organization efforts and hopefully seeking funds in the future. Thinking about how does your organization address diversity and inclusion? Are there policies and procedures that you have that are aligned with that? Of course, as I indicated before, we're not just looking at this from a philanthropic perspective, but how, from a global perspective, is your organization addressing diversity and inclusion? When we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're not just talking about the most evident areas, but that, of course, includes race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, rural versus urban. And often what gets left out is physical or developmental disabilities within a group of people. Next slide. Diversity in the nonprofit sector. Of course, we know the traditional power dynamics between philanthropy and nonprofit organizations is continually changing. And the community beneficiaries of the nonprofits are also imbalanced. It really is an imbalanced world out there. Can you say, I'd like to get the audience to raise your hand if you really feel like your organization is doing an excellent job in ensuring that people that you're serving are truly a part of your grant-seeking efforts or fundraising efforts? Any hands? A few. I guess that's why you're in the session today. Yeah, so I mean, it's really important to involve your organization. And I'll say, just from my perspective, I work for an organization in Indianapolis, Indiana, that serves people who are blind or visually impaired. And our organization really has, I would say, we really walk the walk and talk the talk. 60% of our employees are blind or visually impaired. And in fact, my grant professional here today is actually visually impaired. Caroline, if you raise your hand. Yeah, so it's amazing, just our interaction. She truly understands in terms of when we're writing applications, how that would relate for someone who's blind or visually impaired. You know, so incorporating that into our grant seeking efforts, and even from a major gift standpoint and also sponsorships, really has helped us to increase our funding within the organization. So the question is how do you really harness the energies and resources of philanthropy to balance the power within the sector and promote diversity, equity, inclusion? So we're really challenging you to think about, from an organizational perspective, how your organization is doing when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Next slide. So from a funder perspective, and I know this isn't new information for this group, we are certainly seeing some dramatic changes in the funding, grant making sector as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we feel a lot of that has to do with some key motivators, which of course, as we all know, our U.S. population is growing. It's becoming more and more diverse on many levels. More and more now, you're constantly hearing about diversity in the news, and I would say also not getting too far into political, but the political rhetoric that is happening from a national perspective is also I believe, impetus for grant makers now saying, we want to do something about this. We want to make some changes. We have an asset base that, we got to give out 5% of our asset base each year. And they're looking at how can we make a change in that? How can we encourage nonprofit organizations to really start aggressively looking at how diverse they are? How are they addressing this specific community? And also, they're looking for a much greater impact. Years ago, funders were, of course, focused on numbers. How do we reach the numbers? And that has changed over time to, outcomes, mission-related investments, program-related investments. And now they're looking at what kind of impact are we making? It may not necessarily be about the numbers, but is this organization truly impacting the people that they serve? So some of the funders that have, started to change course, of course, one of the largest foundations in the country, the Ford Foundation, has come out with a new strategic plan that is focused on racial and ethnicity focus. Kresge Foundation, their focus has shifted over the years. They're focused more so on urban. They're focused on food. Annie Casey has long time been a leader in this area as well, and they even have an inventory that they've created for organizations to utilize to look at, how diverse they are as an organization. Kellogg, of course, and I've even thrown in here as well the Central Indiana Community Foundation, which is located in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I would say we are very fortunate in Indianapolis that we have the Lilly Endowment, one of the largest, of course, foundations in the country. And years ago, they invested in the communities in Indiana. All 92 counties in Indiana have a community foundation, and Central Indiana Community Foundation is the largest by far, and I believe it's one of the largest community foundations in the country. And they have been very, very bold this year in changing their strategic direction to say, we want to dismantle systematic racism, which is very bold for an organization that is located in Indianapolis, Indiana, not the most diverse community, right? But they have been very aggressive in that, and we have seen their grant funding shift according to their strategic plan. So many foundations are looking at this, and one of the reasons why we wanted to present to you today to say, in the nonprofit sector, we have to change, because the funding is changing, right? And that doesn't mean that we shift our mission. It just means that we have to start thinking differently about the people we serve and how we're addressing these needs. Next slide. So from a grant seeker's perspective, as a nonprofit seeking funds, what do you do in this new paradigm shift? You might be wondering, how does my organization measure up? And I would say that in order to do that, you have to clearly understand the definitions behind diversity, equity, and inclusion. So next slide. So under building block 1, it really talks about how do you establish a foundation. So diversity is defined as a range of unique characteristics, the things that we've already mentioned, individuals, including race and ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, physical disabilities, religious beliefs and other ideologies, and relationship to place. Equity means that everyone has access to opportunities necessary to satisfy their essential needs. So what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to your organization? There is an organizational assessment that has been created by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and I'm sure with the presentation you can just certainly link to this assessment. I actually went on and conducted the assessment for our organization. And I do consider our organization to be pretty diverse and inclusive. However, even when I went on, we just measured up at about 70%. So I encourage you to go through that inventory and look at, okay, where does my organization fit, and where it actually will provide you with areas of strength and areas of weakness that could be really valuable, I think, long term. Next slide. So some questions to consider in establishing a foundation. What value does diversity and inclusion represent to your organization? I can't reiterate enough, and I think Dr. Turner and Cynthia will mention this as well. This cannot just be a funding, you as the grant professional trying to get this accomplished. It really takes the entire organization to be on board with this process. So how inclusive are your board? How inclusive is your leadership within the organization? We have to really be open to have these discussions. Is there a commitment, at all levels of the organization? I can speak from my standpoint, being at BOSMA for 7 years. As I indicated, 60% of our employees are blind or visually impaired. Every single department has someone who is blind or visually impaired in their department. And you might be wondering, how can people who are blind use a computer? How can they do these things? We always say people who are blind can do everything that we can do. They just have to do things differently. So we've been very intentional as an organization at ensuring that we are addressing the needs of our population from an employee standpoint, but also from a client standpoint as well. All right, and then lastly, is equity integral to your operations? Looking at your policies and procedures. We have actually often been asked just in the past 2 years for a diversity policy. That would of course be incorporating your HR department and ensuring that you have, policies and procedures tied to diversity and inclusion. Next slide. So next will be assessing your target audience, and that's going to mean different things for, many organizations, but how are you currently addressing your target population that you're writing grants for, your beneficiaries, and then looking at, and I can say from an impact standpoint, we are actually headed down this road ourselves. I have talked with our CEO, who is also who is blind, about we want to be able to address the needs of our target population, but also the subgroups within our target population. So what I mean by that is we are serving people who are blind or visually impaired. We are now looking at how many women do we serve? all of this information that we really have at our disposal, but now we're specifically asking for funding within segmented groups. So we're looking at women, we're looking at people with diabetes, we're looking at, people who are veterans, we're looking at youth, we're looking at a variety of different subgroups to now seek funding for, because what happens is it really opens you up to more funding opportunities. So, of course, that involves collecting data, right? So this is where you pull in another department. We all know about working with our program staff. So getting that information, thinking about, how is that data collected? What additional data do we need? And I would say, too, if this is something that you're seriously thinking about doing, like I said, it has to be throughout the organization, possibly included in your strategic plan. That is something that we're doing, so you can get the entire organization on board with this effort. Next slide. So questions to consider, what information do you have that's already available, which I've alluded to before? Can your current audience be categorized in subgroups? I did already mention that. And then what changes have occurred over the past, 3 years, 5 years? Reason why we go back 10 years is because census data is based on 10 years, of course, as we all know. And then what existing resources can be utilized to complete, this assessment? Reaching out to local universities. You might engage with a group of graduate students that have that want to do a project on your organization. So there's a lot of opportunities here to collect this information so that you have it at your disposal in order to, include in your grants moving forward. And then lastly, who will create the measurement process and tools? And again, that would be involvement from a program perspective. Okay. Yeah, sure.
When you're collecting data and you're doing it, with the minority population, I gotta be mindful of the fact that I don't want to be just me taking all the time. And how do you have kind of a best practice or approach that you try to take to make sure that they feel that this is not a burden to them, that we're constantly asking them to explain themselves to me, and I'm the one that has the control because I'm the grant writer and I have access to the money. I feel like there are a lot of dynamics that I want to be more aware of and that I don't really know how to get into.
And you mean, just to clarify, you mean that working with your program staff, because you're constantly...
We have some program staff, but I don't think all of the program staff are at this level, and I would like to move with them into more of a community-based approach. And I find that that's a challenge, and I just don't want it to always be about taking from the community itself when they're super burdened by life, basically.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about people that have more trauma or more discrimination or racism or whatever. I don't want to be perpetuating that system back into that
information, yeah. And what we're talking about is simply data collection, and this is under the realm of, working with your program staff to get that information because they have the relationship in most cases. I understand you're saying from a community-based approach, you might be requesting that information. And we encounter that too within our organization because, we are working with people who are blind or visually impaired, but there has been a hesitancy up until now to request that specific information from clients, and really as it relates more to financial information. So I can understand where that can certainly be a challenge in getting that. And the way that we've addressed it is, we are asking from a aggregate standpoint, does your income, for example, fall in this category? So people don't have to feel like they need to specifically give that financial information. And usually they feel more comfortable in that situation. But we also say, if you don't feel comfortable in giving us this information, then for our records, we will just mark did not disclose. And that's okay too, because you're absolutely right. You don't want to perpetuate any concerns that they may have in working with your organization. Okay.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, I think you're asking something else, and I'll probably cover that a little bit more because I do the whole evaluation piece. So I'll cover that a little bit more for you.
Okay. Okay, now we are moving on to building block 3, where Dr. Bernard Turner will come up and talk about this building block. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Dad, come on, you all can do better than that. Good morning, sound like my students at 8 o'clock in the morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hey, have you all ever did a presentation and then you run through it and then you write all over it? So I might deviate a little bit from my slides, but all of us bring 3 different perspectives. Now, I don't know about you all, but see, I used to be a past president of GPA. Started off as a grant writer at United Way. I worked in Washington, D.C. as a senior program officer for a philanthropic organization. I teach grant writing workshops at our Center for Nonprofit Management. But then again, it's led me to my current position. And believe it or not, people that know me laugh at this because usually I'm one of those people that's gone in 3 years or less. But as my mama said, you're getting a little mature now. You need to stay somewhere. So I've been in my current job. At Belmont University, where I'm a associate professor of social entrepreneurship. So we're teaching our students how to have those entrepreneurial skills to go in and work with nonprofits and take them to the next level. So with that, I look back, and we were talking last night. I worked in a community-based organization that deals with hospice, HIV and AIDS. My church, we have funding and work with a public housing site. So residents of public housing, minority and women-owned businesses in Nashville and Memphis, Tennessee, and also the homeless and at-risk youth and all those things. But one of the things that I find out really interesting is that, and this is what we teach my students, when you're talking about social entrepreneurship, that you have to go into the community and you need to talk to the people, okay? Because, and I'm going to tell y'all this, and I know this is being taped, and I know I work at Belmont University, but Belmont, 10 years ago, spent $9.5 million to go in a community next to ours, had a lot of public housing sites, and they had a Rose Park Community Center. We needed a softball stadium. So our students, our team can play. So what they did was build a softball stadium. There is wedged between an elementary school and a middle school. They did a track so the kids could come out and do phys ed outside. And track had some surface that is supposed to prevent injuries. We also gave $25,000 to that community center annually. What else did we do? The construction company that we hired was a minority construction company, and they had jobs for the community. But guess what? They didn't tell the community about all of this until after the fact. And I went to a community meeting. I hadn't been in one of those in years, and those folks were upset. They couldn't see the fact that this was going to be an opportunity because we didn't include them on the front end. But so what Belmont had to do, I told our director of community relations, the president hired someone that had been a executive director of a nonprofit for 25 years. She lived in that community. Checkpoint, that was a good thing for him to do, even though he did it after the fact. So, but our relationships with that community is better now. Maya Angelou was at Belmont like 5 years ago. Guess who had the seats right here and the stage right here? And I was way back there. That was the community. So what we had to do, we built trust with that community. And they know now that they can come to Belmont and voice their opinion and somebody will listen to them. I told them you should have did that in the first place. But anyway, I have a slide right before this. This is, see, I can't, No, it's not. Well, I'm missing a slide for some reason. We're building, because it's building block number 3, defining audience segments. This building block is focused on categorizing a market segmentation. How do you put together your clients, your other stakeholders, your community partners? And I did some research, and I found out that they talked about you have to develop a transformation step of a culture of inclusiveness. Now, when we talk about diversity and inclusiveness, you guys, people, when you say diversity, they usually think it's a black-white issue. No, it's more than that. That's why we add inclusiveness on there. Because inclusiveness means that we're going to be respectful of everyone, no matter what they bring to the table. Now I'll go to, these questions they have in here. What is the focus for reaching and engaging these communities? It is more than I got a grant opportunity. I want you on the grant. And then you heard what our speaker said yesterday, where they got that $5,000. Usually when they come and they ask us, or our church go and we ask people if they're going to want to collaborate with us, we sit down with them and tell them, you're going to be an equal partner. This is what you're going to get. This is what we're going to get. We don't hog all the money. Because what happens, you guys, you know how it is. I call it one and gone. You get a grant. When the grant is over, you gone. You just making it worse for the next nonprofit that come behind you. Okay, this stuff is not common. It's not like it's rocket science. It's common sense. And it's good business sense, okay? So these are some of the questions I put. What is the focus for reaching and engaging these communities? Hopefully, did I do something wrong? Hopefully it's not just, thank you, Barb. Heck, I'm going to have to give her a tip. Okay. But you guys, come on. One of the things, we have to be honest on why we want to engage these communities. How many of y'all ever had any backlash because you went in and thought you were doing good? And they tell you, no, you're not doing good. Because our resident association, where my church is 501c3, is at Samaritan Ministries Incorporated. The residence advisor, the president, that woman is the gatekeeper. If she don't want you in there, the good thing about it, she'll tell you, we don't want you in here using our folks just to get this money. And then you're one and gone. I can't stand one and gone. All right. Okay, does your current audience compare to the local demographics and underrepresented groups? We have a foundation in Nashville called the Healing Trust. I was there. They started in 2003. I was the external grant reviewer from 2004 to 2012. This what gets me. You say you're serving a Hispanic population. You don't have one Hispanic on the board. Okay, or there was some that says dealing with domestic violence, they don't have representation on the board. We're all do-gooders. Aren't we? We do-gooders. But sometimes do-gooders make the mistake of not doing good with the people they serve. But I know it's not nobody in this room because we are professional and compassionate grant makers. Well, the other thing, who is the staff person that's going to lead this? Okay? Passion is one thing, but we also have to show compassion and pick someone that's going to be truly representative, not only of the community to work with us, but our staff needs to look like that community as well. And I'm not saying it got to be a black person always dealing with a black neighborhood. No, because what I do is bring people along with me. And, if you have trust in the community and you take somebody else with you, they're going to believe, because they know Bernard, they call me Dr. D, Dr. T, all right. All right, so building box theory, let's just jump to that so I don't take up too much. Some action steps that must be intentional. You all know what that word means, intentional? You are acting just like my students. Come on here. If I said I'm gonna give extra credit points for everybody asks a question and everybody speak over it. What did you say, ma'am?
On purpose.
On purpose. Purposeful, that's right. Offer and provide a place at the table. And you guys, sometimes you need to have all the meetings at your place. When I was at Meharry Medical College, and I did work there 3 times in my career, it wasn't that I couldn't keep a job. I kept leaving, getting a big grant on the way out, and they kept hiring me back. I used to go meet with faculty that was writing grants, and they was like, you're coming to my office? I don't have to come to the White House because we had a big white administrative building. I said, no, I'm coming to you. They said, no one has ever came to my office to talk to me about writing a grant. See those little bitty things? They go a long way. She's shaking her head. What's your name? Caroline. She's on this journey with me. Okay. They may not have the education, some of these diverse communities you're working with, but they have common sense and street sense. And that goes a long way. All right. Be intentional again. Some barriers do exist around trust, acceptance, and success. You guys just treat people like you want to be treated. These communities, that's all they want from you. And they just don't want you to be a user. Okay. And they don't want to be dependent upon your services as well. I used to work for HIV clinic and they told us, the first development director, they said, you cannot send anything to a client's house that got comprehensive care center in an envelope. And they said, the majority of our folks are low income. So every year we did a event called Vintners, wine tasting, silent auction. So I went and just randomly pulled 10 files out of our 2,000 clients. And guess what? 4 of them were making over $100,000 a year. And we had never asked them for money or anything. And I said, well, we should ask them for money. Oh, no, we can't do it. I said, look, they say they make $100,000. Low-hanging fruit, but we just forgot about that. All right, where am I at now? Oh, did you flip this? Am I finished? No, I didn't talk about building block number 4. My person over here that's clicking it, she before me or after me or whatever. Okay, I'm on 4. This building block focuses on a sustained commitment to building relationships with diverse communities. What are we talking about, you guys? Here, we're talking about trust and we're talking about relationships. Just like we deal with donors, we have to build relationships, okay? I'm not going to read all of those things, but let me just say what prevents us from building these relationships. Negative perceptions, okay? One and gone. I did tell you all about one and gone. Everybody, you all know about one and gone, right? Hello? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Access issues. My seniors that's graduating in December, they're working with a group. Marion Wright Elderman has these children defense funds called Freedom Schools. So they did a focus group with some parents the other night. Now, what happened was they said only a few parents came, but the person they were doing it for, the nonprofit they were working with, they had food, they had daycare for the families. But what happened is she didn't get the word out in time. So my students were a little disappointed. They thought they were going to get about 10 parents. I said, no, you got 3. So that gives you somewhat of a representative sample, even though it might not be big. But if I was having a meeting, I would always stress, we're going to have food for you. Parents, you don't have to worry about your child. We got somebody to look after them. And what else we going to do? We're going to even help them do the homework while they're there. So what does that free? It frees up the parents' time, and usually they're mothers that's concerned about their kids. Community needs from our perspective, boo. It's just like we take my students to developing countries, and I said, you know what? You have to learn the culture over here. Don't come over here telling these folks what they should be doing. Same thing in our communities. And talking and not sharing. Talking and not sharing. Okay, and the questions that, as you notice, we all have questions after each building block. For number 4, I'm trying to read this. I need to stop trying to look cute and put on my reading glasses, but let me see. I'm just going to say a couple of them. Why is it important for the proposed program and event? Why do you need this community? And you do need them, okay? Some other things, what existing relationships we have in these communities, or better yet, who do we have on staff like at Belmont, a big university that's working in this community? I usually go to our director of service learning because he knows every class that's out there doing internships, service learning with these organizations. And you know what? Being inclusive and diverse is not rocket science, like I said, it's common sense. Okay, yes, I didn't read over all my slides because you all can read, okay? Well, I hope you can. If you can't, let's talk afterwards, okay? So come on, Cynthia. Cynthia Renee Oda is going to come and talk about the last two business box and bring some. You can add anything you want, dear.
In addition to bringing along staff people with your programs, it's always good to bring along a former client or even a current client because they can talk one-on-one with people you're trying to reach.
All right. You all get to learn, okay? I don't have all the answers, and you all know how it is about working in your different communities. I know what has worked best for us after my first, and what I do even for the nonprofits. My program, we deal with anywhere from 30 to 40 nonprofits every academic year. So I always tell them they're co-instructors. So in the summer, I bring them together on Belmont campus, give them a wonderful meal. They like that. But I also give some of them that have worked with us at least 3 or 4 years, I give them a certificate of appreciation. The first year that I did it, I used to report to the Associate Provost for Academic Affairs. She got up there and said, Dr. Turner is the only person I know that can get 55 nonprofits in a room. And they all come on time. And one lady from CEO from Hope Clinic for Women, she stood up and said, well, he done taught us grant writing. We know we better show up because we owe him. And I'm like, I just got this job. Don't be saying that. She said, but we owe him. But I owe them too because they're the ones that help my program be a success, okay? Right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. And I'm about to fall.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm building block number 5, developing a marketing and communication plan. Now, this is a master's level, so I don't have to tell you all. I know you all have one, right? How many of you have a marketing and communication plan? Okay, for those who do not have one, the little tab on some of the grants that you write, they have on there, how do you market to your audience and how do you communicate to that audience? What do some of you put down for that? The young man earlier, the very first speaker that we had, he talked about how we do a lot of talking on grants. Remember what he said? Remember what did he say? We lie. Remember, that's the first thing he said. He said, we lie. Well, the most important thing about a marketing and communication plan, you don't have to lie. Because what you're doing is you're thinking through what you're trying to do. And the most important thing is that this building block deals with, you have to be proactive. It has to be focused. You have to know exactly what you're going for. Believe me, it will alleviate a lot of distress at the end when you're trying to put things together. And how many of you do Gantt charts? All the Gantt, I can't see your hands up, Gantt charts. I'm project management, so I understand those Gantt charts. And believe me, they really do work. So Arvetta talked about the foundation, which is something that you have to know about your organization, where it's at. The whole foundation thing. Dr. T talked about intentional. You have to be intentional. And the most important thing that Arvetta talked about was assessing your organization, because that gives you the baseline of what you're actually trying to do. Once you know where you're at, then you can sort of move to where you're going. And we're going to talk about evaluation at that point. I'll give you some pointers on that also. I love evaluation, so I do understand what you were trying to say. But what I'm trying to say is that you got to have the baseline. And that's where your marketing and communication plan comes in. It tells you where you're at, because, we have different grants for different things. I'm sure you guys could name 1,000,001 things that you have grants for. I'm with Oda Enterprises, which is a for-profit small consulting firm that I've been president of since 1997. I know I look young, but I'm old. Since 1997, we've been in various communities. I mean, I've worked with schools, I've worked with nonprofits, I've worked with government agencies. We've been all over the place and still is. The main problem that we have is not writing the grant, is the organization capacity to do the grant. And that's the constant struggle that we're trying to build up, is the capacity, is getting these organizations to the capacity that they can write a good grant. Because most of the time it's not all about your writing. I mean, because we have the need. And like you alluded to, you don't want to go into communities just because you have a need and you're going to these communities, but you're not giving them nothing. You're always taking. And believe me, they know that. Communities keep score. They know the agencies they could trust, and they know the agencies that they feel like is helping them move to what they want to be. That young man on Tuesday, whatever day it was, Thursday, he also said that, you know, we talk a lot about our mission, but what did he say we should be focusing on? Community. If we focus on community, we will hit it right all the time. And that's the hard part, is how do you get into different communities? Whether you're dealing with disability, whether you're dealing with racial, you know, where you're dealing with poor communities, how you get into these different communities. Diversity is so much more than black and white or whatever you think diversity is. Diversity is bringing diverse views, diverse people, diverse insight into whatever you're trying to do. And that's why if you have a marketing plan and a communication plan, you could focus that a little bit more. Next slide, please. Putting all this into action. One of the things that we talked about is, how do we get it out there? How do we, after we get everything together with our diversity plan, with our communication plan and marketing plan, how we put this into action? First of all, we have to advertise the program. What does that mean? Anybody?
Let the people know.
Let the people know. And by the way, you're not going to just sit here and look at me. Come on now, you got to get involved with this. Placing posts in cultural groups. What does that mean? You're doing a thing with diabetes, let's say. What's the first thing you would do? Anybody?
Find a user group or social affinity group that identifies.
Exactly. Because you can't just sit in your office and do what? Write a grant on diabetes. Even though you have all the facts, you have all the information, you have everything you need to know. But then you're asking yourself, how come people don't get in there to get treatment? To go to a nutritionist, to do things that they need to do. What's their barriers? How would you know that? You got to ask people. You got to get involved with it. I remember one time we were doing some kind of, I forgot what kind of program was, but I had to go to one of their meetings. They had like little support group meetings just to get a feel as to what was actually going on, because I had no idea. I had the theories in my head. I had the research in my head, but I didn't have that human element, which is what some funders are looking for. Do you really know what you're talking about? And if you don't know what you're talking about, believe me, they could tell, because everything is competitive now. What kind of collaborations you have? What your board looks like? How are you doing all of this? Then it says here, sponsoring a culturally specific community event. How many of you have done that for your targeted population that you're trying to do? What was it?
I work for a PBS station, so I do events for lots of communities.
Good.
Japanese.
Good.
Mix of everything based on our content.
You hear what she says? Based on her content, she does community events, small events, for all types of different, sectors. Depends on what she's doing and what she's focusing on. What does that do for you?
It brings trust. It allows...
The key word here, would you say that again? Trust. It brings trust. Go on.
It also allows us to bring the groups to the table when
solved, because after they've gained our trust, we can then bring everybody to the table and have a conversation about what's the next step and what work should be done to solve the next step. So it just allows us to convene in groups.
And the reason why that's important is because she's already developing a relationship with that community. And believe me, it doesn't have to be nothing really super big. Just something to let that community know that you are connecting with them. Instead of taking all the time, you're giving. And then in return, they're giving back to you also. Who else got another example of some community event that they...
I have a question. Can you talk about that dynamic between coming in and doing a community event versus working with the community to put on their own event?
You could do both. It could go either way. And normally what you do is you work with the community to put on an event. For instance, like we have a senior, I was working with this other community, and they were trying to get seniors engaged. So we started off with, what do the seniors like to do? What's the one thing seniors like to do? Play bingo. No, I'm serious. So what we did was we had a bingo breakfast, or brunch, or whatever you call it. It was in between breakfast and lunch. And we had about 30 seniors show up because all they heard was what? Bingo. And now we do the WISE program, which I wrote a grant for, and we got funding through the state, the WISE program. And now at that particular site, we have regular senior programs taking place at that particular site. But it started off with having our bingo breakfast, because that's something that we identified that the seniors like to do. And they told us that. And we work with the seniors there's always one little old lady who knows everybody. And you have to identify that person, get them involved, and then it goes from there. So it could be either one. That's why I said you might want to do your own little event, or you might want to work with the seniors, like they wanted to do a peace walk. Not the seniors, but this community did a peace walk one time. So we helped organize the peace walk for them. And now whatever we want, they're on it. It's a housing community, whatever they want. We're on it.
I'm a consultant, but speaking of the power dynamic thing that made me think of, I had a client that is a community action, social services type organization in a community that is extremely diverse. And so what they did was they offered up, they decided to have a community day to kind of embrace the new cultures that were moving into their neighborhood. And they offered up, their piece of the plan was stage, mic, speakers, and they invited the city leadership. But then they reached out to dance schools and temples and churches and things to say, hey, people just kept on introducing.
Right.
So we'll have these girls do their dance, and then we'll have this group cook and
right.
From there, and, oh, you should invite so and so. And we had to plan ahead, but I felt like the power dynamic was pretty even, because it was, hey, we're providing the stuff that we're good at, and if you guys
provide the stuff that you're good at. That's good. Thank you.
That was nice.
Okay, one more.
Well, I just would add to what you said, all of you, that what I haven't heard you emphasize enough is that this is a long-term process.
Oh, it's on my notes. I was getting there. You're right. It doesn't happen overnight.
No, and it's so I bring up, I'm also a consultant, and I bring up an example of one of my clients sponsored for Baltimore Health System, which is in West Baltimore. They're in the neighborhoods just south of where the Freddie Gray incident happened. It is an extremely poor section of the city. 95% African American, and when the Sisters of Bon Secours came to that neighborhood in 1881 and never left.
Wow.
In the 60s, there was a steady flow out of white residents, a couple of social services subsidiary, affordable housing subsidiary. So the story on the affordable housing subsidiary, which started about 25, 30 years ago, was they decided to go, they quietly bought up some townhouses, row houses, we call it in Baltimore, and to make affordable housing. And once that was done, they went to the community and said, listen, we are never going to do that again. Why? We had to do it because of some real estate speculation concerns that would drive the price up. So from now on, you're in every decision
That we make.
about this housing. And so they've gone from these row houses, handful of row houses, to 800 units of affordable housing in West Baltimore, and the community's been with them every step of the way. And there's still blips. There's still times when the community gets mad about it.
That's right. And they will. And they will. It takes a long time. That's right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Next, go to the next slide, please. Okay. Developing a marketing and communication plan, please consider these 6 questions. What community relationships are already established? Everyone knows what they already have established in their organization. Everyone knows that. What are your resources in marketing and communication to successfully develop and implement a plan? You got to have the resources. You got to have the people, the money, something. You got to have the resources. Will you collaborate with other groups in your community outreach efforts? This is taken almost like a semi-assessment as to where you're at in your organization. What type of media and other communications tools are feasible? Because different tactics you use for different groups. Which communication channels does the Pacific community use most frequently? And that's something that you have to know, you have to get that. Because if I go into, I work a lot with housing, public housing. And we have, in our public housing community itself, they fight sort of with each other. We might have an Hispanic community housing on this corner, Asian community housing on this corner, African American community housing on this corner, and maybe more of a mixed one on the next corner. And then they're all interfaced. They're all owned by the same people. They all are managed by the same people, but they all fight within each other. They want to do, one won't come on the other. And our challenge is always, how do we bring these people together? Now, unless we're doing a Pacific grant just for Hispanics or Asians or whatever, then that's different. But most of the time, sorry, my watch. Oh, it's everybody. Okay. It's emergency. It's emergency. Okay. Amber alert. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. And so you just have to, I lost my thought now. I lost it. Okay. What communication tools, and you have to understand what communication tools does the Pacific community use. Now, for my African American community, we find that, and this is how it works for us, is that we go door to door. I pay some kids, give them a few dollars, because you don't take much for them, especially if they like you. And they'll pass the flyers out, hand out little things, but we go door to door. For my Hispanic community, I find that they like for me to have little taco days or something. And I meet them in the middle. I meet them at the community house, and they always show up. I cannot get African Americans to show up like that, but I can get the Hispanic to show up like that. Asians are a little bit, they have to have their own, at least in my community, they have to have more of their own go in there. And luckily I know a lot of them, so it's easy for me to pick people out and have them do things for me. The key is I get youth to do a lot of my work. Because they're from that community, they know what's going on, and they can really be extremely helpful. That's just the way that I do it. And then it talks about, bilingual members. And of course, you guys are all seasoned people. You understand that. You know, if you have materials, you have to put them in the native language of the people that you're trying to serve. Whether it's English, whether it's Asian, whether it's Hispanic or whatever, you have to put it in especially Hispanic, because a lot of the parents cannot, they cannot read English. And it's being translated by their kids, and no telling what the kids are telling them. Believe me. I know a little Spanish, and so sometimes I catch them. And especially if the kids are in the wrong, they be telling their parents a lot of different things. So you got to be careful of that. Next slide, please. Building block 6, the evaluation process. How many of you have a strong evaluation? How many of you actually evaluate what you do? Well, that's pretty good. I'm impressed. I'm impressed about that because most people do not have that. Evaluation is a critical tool for understanding the impact of what you're doing, especially when you're trying to attract diverse communities. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Putting it into action. I know I'm trying to get through, so I give you guys time for question and answers. Putting it into actions. You have gathered all of your data. You have your baseline. You have everything all mapped out here. What do you do with it? Anybody, what do you do with it? Especially some of you veterans who have do evaluations all the time. What do you do with it? Well, we're not talking about funding. We're talking about more in-house. We're talking about an evaluation plan on your community that you're trying to get into. Similar to what this young lady up here was talking about.
Sure. Well, you tell them your board, and you share with your board, and your lead staff, be part of the staff meeting.
Good. What else?
Share it with your client.
Great. That's exactly it. That's good too. Excellent.
Cynthia, I was going to add, you could use information as they conduct focus groups to get further
That's right.
information.
Especially if you notice some weak spots. See, that's the main thing. Because for some of you, you might be right on target. Because I know all of you practice good diversity. I do understand that. Right?
Yeah.
I can't hear you. Okay, all of you practice good diversity. So that's not the issue. The issue is, are you on point with what you're trying to do today? That's the issue. Because with grant writers and grant professionals, we change all the time. Because you might have you might be targeting artistic kids one day, and then you might do a grant for HIV/AIDS the next day. So you're constantly all over the place. So this is looking at specific target population that you're actually trying to target now. And so you have to have some kind of way of measuring that, some kind of way of looking at that. And that's why my favorite word, data, is so important. Data is so important because everything is data driven. And that's what you would share, like somebody over here said, with your board. You would share with your community members. You would share with all the stakeholders that's involved. That's like more of an eternal evaluation because it's trying to let you know that if you're on point. When you get data information back that tells you that, well, your targeted was to reach out to 100 autistic kids, and you really only got maybe 20, what is that telling you? What'd you say? You have an outreach problem. So you would go back to your cutting board and do what? With some new strategies. She absolutely correct. You would come up with some new strategies. But you only know that if you're what? If you're measuring it somehow. That's why data is so important. I love data. If data shows an increase in attendance in the audience segment you wish to reach, indicates that your strategies are working. But if that data changes or decrease the attendance, this segment might show the opportunity for you to reach out and really look at doing something a little bit different. Next slide, please. Okay, the evaluation process, questions to consider. I love evaluations. But I'm going to go back to what you were saying. One of the things that you were talking about was what happens, how do you, instead of taking all the time, how do you give? I would start by doing small things, similar to what one of the young ladies over here was doing for your community. I would start by doing small little programs. First of all, you got to build the trust of whatever community you're actually going into. And that goes back to the young lady back here that was saying, you know, whether it's driven by you or driven by them, or you guys do it together. But you have to find a way of breaking into that. And like, you know, Dr. T alluded to earlier, sometimes it's not just about putting a black face out there or putting a whatever face out there. Sometimes it's just about, you have to get into the crowd. And that's why I like little small community events. Because, like, for instance, I didn't know bingo was such a hit with seniors. And I'm a senior. I know I don't look it, but anyway, I'm a senior. But what I'm saying is I didn't know bingo was so important to them. Bingo and food. And so we hit on both. And because we did a couple of those things, they already bought into what we were actually trying to do. So you have to find a niche of what that community really wants. Maybe you have a crime problem or something like that. I don't know. We all have crime problems, but we did a peace walk. Didn't cost the community a thing just to participate. We had people came out from all over the place to participate in the peace walk. And then from there, we held a community meeting, and then we started our process of writing for the crime grant, and we got it. So it's little bitty steps you have to take. This thing is not going to happen overnight. Diversity never happens overnight because you're building trust. And trust is something that's earned. And believe me, once you get labeled in your community, like some of our big agencies are already labeled in the community, they have a hard time recuperating from that because the community only sees them in one way. But you can still go back and change that. It just takes little bitty steps. Figure out what you can do and do it well. Figure out what you need and get the right people together with you, and you could do amazing things for the community. Amazing things.
One of the trust points that we push too from a grant writing perspective in doing the budget is making sure that if they're working with community partners, because we don't, have an in or we need to reach that population, that we pay them for their services, and that's included in the budget.
That's right. Good point. Good point.
Can you repeat that for our live stream audience?
She says one of the things that they do for her community partners is that when they do little things for them or whatever they collaborate and do, she makes sure that it's in the budget that they pay them for that. And so therefore there's this trust level already, because now I'm doing little things for you. You're rewarding me. That means you're valuing me, which is what you just did. You valued them. And you valued their time and their effort and what they were doing. And she made sure that that's always part of the budget. And so that's a good, okay, that's a good thing to do. Okay, the next thing real quick, now I'm going to end. Go back. What type of data will you collect? And how will you collect the data? Believe me, is garbage in, garbage out. You don't want to do that. Collect stuff that you really need and is going to be important to you and your organization. Who will lead the measurement and analyst effort? It's very important who's going to analyze your information. Who will create the measurement tool, administer it, and analyze the data? Our staff resources or volunteers available to manage the measurement process, or our internal resources needed? You got to figure all of that out. And once you figure that out and put all that together, you would have the best program, and you'd be able to do some really great things with your organization and defining a diverse community. I'm going to call back up Dr. T, and he's going to close us out.
Prayer.
No, not with prayer. Not with prayer.
All right, does anybody have any questions for any of us, or you want to add what you're doing? Yes, Miss Kimberly from Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment because I know in doing, as a consultant and someone who is a member of many of these communities that fail to be represented, just want to put a pin in the point that, one, this is not easy work, just like it's long-term work, it's not easy work, and it's challenging work. And a lot of times we can put this information out there like it's somebody else's job. to do this work. It's the human resources person, or it's that community outreach person, or whoever that person is. But I just want to emphasize how this falls on everyone involved to challenge, because so much of this is related to status quo and the way that things have always been done, and even institutional racism and all of these things that seem really hard to change. And so I just want to say that it takes each individual person, regardless of your position within an organization, to say, here's why we need to be doing something different. Even when everyone else in the room may look at you like you're crazy, you at least have to say that someone made that statement. Because a lot of times you will find that organizations don't want to change because they like the way things are, because it benefits those who get to make the decision. And sometimes you have to walk away from that. And sometimes it may be at a your own personal stake, because I've had to step off of boards of organizations where they asked me to come on because they wanted representation, but they didn't want the inclusion. They didn't want to be challenged about why they weren't including their participants as decision makers, but only as in this kind of patronizing, kind of systematic way. And so I just want to emphasize that, each person has to take that individual responsibility to say, I'm willing to be the person in the room who's going to make the hard statement or ask the hard question, even if nobody likes it.
And I'm going to try to repeat that, but I'm going to paraphrase it really small. The main topic of what she talked about is each and every one of our responsibility to be that person, that challenge the system that you're in, especially if you find that it's unfair and it's unjust. Because it's not just the system problem. We are the system. We are the problem. And so we have to step forth and really get out there and really, say this is not right. And that might mean, as you put it so eloquently, backing off of certain things, because we know it's not right. But if we don't do it, who's going to do it?
It just puts me to mind of the funders language, who is your target population, which is a language that puts somebody in the crosshairs. It's not asking who's the community you want to
That's right.
Right.
Who is your target?
Who is your targeted population? And that is very, very important, because on most RFPs, all of them, they ask you, who is your targeted population? And you're sitting there doing what? Duh.
Can we press on that a little bit? Because a lot of times some of our employees tend to make it seem like that target population they just don't talk about it appropriately or politically correct, might I say. Like this population just can't do anything for themselves.
That's true.
And that's so not true. So it's like, how do you have those conversations to get everybody on the same page about the actual correct way to have the conversation with funders or just with the community that you're working with, so that there is that trust factor built?
She's talking about how you get everybody on the same page when they look at the targeted population and everyone feels like they can't do what they can't do. We feel like we have all the answers. And she's saying, how can you get everyone on the same page? Dr. T?
What I've done before is have one of them come to a meeting.
Yeah.
And then they like, who is that person? Oh, that's my expert in the community. And then when they start talking, people start listening. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm like crazy anyway, because if they disrespect them, I disrespect them. Say, wait a minute, they have a lot to answer. But that's what I do. I bring them to the meeting as my guest speaker who's an expert in the community. Yeah, people don't like that. We have to realize when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, it makes some people very uncomfortable.
It does.
But that's all right. They always tell us we need to step out of our comfort zone, so they need to step out of theirs.
That's right.
And I had talked a bit about, people with disabilities sometimes being left out of the diversity and inclusion conversation. And what we often do in our organization is we bring along a client with us. We have them as a part of, if it's an event, they do a testimonial. We have a large event called Die in the Dark that we put on every year, about 800 guests. We have a client or an employee who is blind or visually impaired sitting at every table. So that is an opportunity for our guests to engage with the people that we serve directly, which gives them a bit of an understanding of relatability, understanding where this person is coming from. Because of blindness being, we always say it's a low incidence disability, that's just very vital for us as an organization because many people don't encounter someone who's blind or visually impaired on a daily basis.
Make sure you all check out the case studies. We have time for one more.
So looking at it from the other side, it's important to find who are the influencers in the community that you're trying to reach. Do you have any tactics for how you find those influencers and bring them in so that they can give the best representation of the community, but also take it back into the community and engage them more?
What she just said was looking for the influencers in the community. How do we find them? How do we define them? And how do we get them into our group so we can get them back into the community? And who wants to answer that? I guess I will. Since I have the mic. The influencers in the community. That's what every project that you actually work with. I learned that a lot working with kids. Because there's always one kid that influences all the other kids. And once I get that one kid on my side, then I know that I got the whole pack on my side. And that's the same thing with community. Every community has an influencer, whether it's a local politician, and I call them champions, really. Whether it's a local politician, or whether it's a Miss Swiss who lives next door, who knows everything that goes on in that community. She's very nosy, but she knows everything. And she could guide her, and people in the community listen to her. Every community, I don't care if they're Asian, Mexican, Hispanic, I don't care if every community has an influencer. And how you find that influencer is just by talking to people. It's just as simple as that. You got to communicate.
And I would add gatekeeper too.
That's both.
Working at schools, it's the custodial staff.
That's right.
You have got to know that staff. You got to clean up. You got to be respectful, and you got to include them. And then everything opens. It's not the principal. That's not who you need for your after school program. So I would add gatekeeper.
She just talked about the gatekeeper, and she says you have to add the gatekeeper. Like she gave a reference to a school, and she says that school, the janitor is one of the main person, one of the main gatekeepers. You get them on your side, and you got the whole school, and that is so true. Because working in after-school programs, I find that out to be really true. And I would like to thank you all. You guys did a great job. Thank you.